Not long ago, I showed how to make a resurrection scene, and since then I found this depiction of Jesus carrying his cross. I found the piece to be moving and meaningful, and felt like I needed to make this one as well. After all, there had to be a crucifixion before there could be a resurrection. Today I'm going to show you how to make this image of Jesus carrying his cross. I had a piece of 4/4 sapele, and it was the width was just about right. It's 5 something, somewhere around 5.5 inches. I cut a piece to length to fit these. It was 4/4. These pieces are 1/4 inch, so I took the 4/4 and resawed it in half and ended up with 2 1/4 inch pieces. So I'll either be able to make 2 of these or use the other sapele for something else. And I had some 1/2 inch oak. I planed that down to 1/4 inch for these. It's too wide to be able to resaw. The most I can resaw on my table saw and bandsaw combination is just under 6 inches, and these are over 6 inches. So I had to take I may take 1/4 or 1/2 inch and plane it down. I took that long piece of sapele and cut it into several pieces of a more manageable length, and I stopped at the drill press to make the pilot holes for the inside cuts. I made the inside cuts first, as always. Using my rules of thumb, I decided to use a number 3 Pegasus modified geometry blade for this entire project, since all the parts are being cut from 1/4 inch thick material. If you're new to scroll sawing, I'll leave a link to my video on choosing blade sizes. After making those few inside cuts, I moved on to the outside cut of what is labeled as the middle piece of Jesus carrying the cross. The plans show a slot and tab construction, but I'm going to modify the plans. With slot and tab construction, there's a tab on one piece, in this case, one of the sections of Jesus' body, which fits into a slot in another piece, the base for this item. The reason for this type of construction is to give a more secure mechanical fit than just a butt joint. In my experience, however, I find slot and tab construction to be a pain to make. If the pieces aren't a perfect fit, you have a sloppy looking area where they meet. Since this is just a display and it won't be subject to much stress, I chose to forego the slot and tabs for a simple butt joint. The glue will be strong enough to hold the two pieces together. I started this next piece by cutting the accent lines first. Then I cut along the bottom of the robe. Since the edge of the workpiece was nearby, I just cut all the way across the bottom rather than making the sharp turn at the corner. This is the easier way to make the cut, so why not do it that way when you can? I cut the next accent line as I came to it, but I could just as easily have gone past it and come back to it later after I finished the perimeter cut. Sometimes there's more than one way to complete a task, and when there is, you should choose whichever feels right at the time. After cutting all the pieces for the 2 figures, I cut the 2 circles for the base. Since I'm not using the slot and tab construction, I didn't cut the slots in the base top piece. Circles aren't that easy to cut perfectly, so if you have trouble following the line exactly, try to stay on the outside of the line. You can then later go back and sand down to the line. With all the parts cut, it's time to start assembly. The parts diagram does a good job of showing how everything fits together. I left the patterns with the part numbers on the pieces until I got to this stage to make sure I got everything right, so now I could peel off the patterns. The back layer for Jesus was the logical place to start, since the other layers would be glued on top of it. As I lined up the 3 layers, I could see that the order made perfect sense. It's always a good idea to do a dry fit of the parts before you start applying glue. I occasionally goof at this step, and once the glue starts to set up, there's usually no way to save parts glued together incorrectly. For small pieces like these, I like to use a glue bottle with a tiny tip. This bottle originally held Elmer's glue, but now we refill it with white glue from a gallon bottle. If you do a lot of woodworking, it's much more economical to purchase supplies like glue in quantity. I use the tip to apply glue to the layers, then use my finger to spread it around. You want to make sure to get glue to the edges, otherwise you may leave gaps where the pieces don't bond together. You want to be careful not to get glue where it isn't needed. If you do, the white glue will dry clear, but it will prevent finish from sticking to the wood. You can paint over it, but I'll be using a spray polyurethane on this project, and glue definitely interferes with that finish. I pulled the patterns off the 2 round pieces that form the base. Since these are only 1/4 inch thick, a round over with the router would be too large a radius, so I just took a piece of sandpaper to the edges. As I put these two circles together, I was careful to orient the grain in the same direction for both pieces. This way, when the wood expands and contracts with changes in temperature and humidity, the pieces won't break apart as they might do with a cross grain situation. When I attach the figures to the base, I'll also be careful to align them with, rather than across, the grain. I found that spring clamps work well for glue-ups like this. They exert pressure straight down and they're easy to apply. Spring clamps are also inexpensive, so any shop owner should be able to afford to keep a number of these on hand in several different sizes. 4 clamps around the edges of the circles was enough to hold them in place while the glue dried. With thin stock, you need to make sure to use enough clamps because once you apply glue, the moisture gives the wood a tendency to warp, and the clamps will overcome that force. Figures were thicker because they had several layers, and a larger spring clamp was needed. It worked perfectly. This was not a difficult project. There were only a couple of inside cuts, but you will need access to 1/4 inch thick material. In case you haven't already seen my video of the resurrection scene, I'll leave a link to that in the description. Both of these will look great displayed together, and I personally think the resurrection scene could be left on display all year long as a symbol of faith. I welcome any comments on this project and would very much appreciate a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Please subscribe to my channel if you haven't already done so, and you won't miss any future projects.